Alright, ladies and gentlemen, Historical Gamer here again, once again. Been a while since I've done a review. I actually tried to do a review of this the other day, but I just got Fraps, which is a screen capture software, and had some issues with it yesterday. It's a very high quality screen capture issue, but I had some issues with rendering. I'm using a free movie maker type software, and I had some issues with rendering where parts of it were showing up and parts of it weren't. So anyway, I'm going to be doing this again. It's going to be a little bit more off the cuff. I had a little bit more scripted last time, but, well, like I said, I didn't save part of that review, and I rendered and deleted the original files, and it was a mess. But anyway, this review is going to be focusing on Supreme Ruler Cold War. It's the third game in the Supreme Ruler series. There was Supreme Ruler 2010, 2020, and now they're going all the way back to starting in 1949 with the Cold War. There's three different game modes. There's multiplayer, which is, as it sounds, not going to review that here today. There is single player, which is the other mode, which is really split into three different scenarios. So really, I guess there's four different game modes. One of them is multiplayer. The other three are single player modes. One of them is a scenario. By the way, this is, if you've played any of the Supreme Ruler games before, this is basically just a different time setting for Supreme Ruler. It's very similar. But as far as the scenarios go here, there's a Capture Busan where you play North Korea, a Cold War scenario where you can actually pick any of the countries that you want to play as, which is different than the stock scenario. There's a stock scenario where you play as either Russia or the United States. And you start in 1949 and you do the Cold War. In the Cold War scenario, you get to pick, so that's a nice little touch considering the campaign game really is just either Russia or the United States in the Cold War. This one you get to pick who you want to be, which is a nice little change. There is also a Vietnam War version called Hanoi Hilton, a Hold Busan where you're the United States in the second half of the Korean War, and your goal is to hold that last corridor in Korea, the Busan perimeter, and then Shadow of the Bear, which is a scenario where you play as China. There also are some custom scenarios. I will not be reviewing those here. In addition to the scenarios, there's sandbox mode where you can play as any country. And the campaign you start with is Cold War. It's a little bit less scripted than the scenario though, so it's more of a, like it says, it's a sandbox version. And then there's the campaign, where you play as either the United States or as Russia, or the Soviet Union, the USSR. So yeah. There are some standard game settings where here you can control different things like how many resources are available, how much money you start with, how important approval is the United Nations important, can you have government changes occur, you can change different, fog of war type things for the military, you can change your victory settings, so, a complete victory, capture your opponent's capital, capture the entire country, unify. I'm not really sure. That is one thing that's lacking in here. Is there's not really a full description of what the victory markers would be here. I'm gonna go with sphere, which is the default version for the Cold War, which makes sense because your goal is for your sphere, your side of the world or group of countries to win. Game settings are pretty normal. You can set difficulty levels. But yeah, so let's go ahead and get in here as the United States. Now, I've played this game a fair amount. I'm actually going to be looking at releasing an after-action report. It's going to be a bit stylized, so it's going to be something where I'm going to be creating kind of a storyline using the game as a basis, but more of a creative project I'm hoping to do using this game with my campaign that I'm playing as Russia right now, so I'm not going to spoil too much. But for those of you who are not familiar with the Supreme Ruler series, there are 5 different DEFCON levels. DEFCON stands for Defense Condition. 5 is absolute peace. Your units are pretty much all totally stood down. 4 is where you start, which is guarded, but nothing too serious. 4 is usually where the U.S. military sits. I'm not sure if they've ever really been at 5, but 4 is usually where they sat, at least throughout most of the Cold War. DEFCON 3, which was increased. Alert statuses were increased to DEFCON 3 a few times during the Cuban Missile Crisis, most notably DEFCON 2, which U.S. nuclear forces did get to once, which is the last step before war. I believe there was an issue where they got to that stage. At least the strategic forces may have gotten to that stage during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I could be wrong on that. And then DEFCON War, which is all-out war. In previous versions of Supreme Ruler, this was something where you could increase or lower the tensions. This is now no longer reflective of your country. It's reflective as the global war status. So it's not just your country's defense status, it's the global status, and it's actually very important to try and keep that low, around 4 or 5 if you can, because it has a lot of impact on your economy. There have been some negative reviews as far as that's concerned. The fact that you can't manually control it now, and that it does have such, huge impacts on your economy, especially when other countries are going to war and changing the world DEFCON level when you don't even do anything. There's also a strategic weapons window where this is, for the Cold War, an important thing. It's where you can manage your nuclear arsenal, put them to assign to certain platforms. So as it starts, you only have really 2 platforms. You can drop some nukes from PBY, which you have one of starting as the USA, or B-29s, which you start with as the USA. You've got 3 of those strategic bomber units that are deployed right now that you can assign to your targeting pool and then assign weapons for them. As the United States, you start with a decent arsenal of 200 plus 10 kiloton weapons, which are very small. They're basically what was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Actually, Nagasaki was closer to around 20 kilotons, but the game starts you with a bunch of 10 kiloton weapons. As Russia, you'll notice you'll start off with a much smaller pool. You only start with 6 because this game starts in 1949, only a few months after Russia detonated its first nuclear weapon. I believe this is kind of the victory meter up here. It shows the different countries and their statuses. So there's 36 countries in white, which would be neutral, non-aligned. 7 leaning toward the USSR. 13 are aligned with the USSR. 21 with the USA. 7 are leaning USA, and like I said, that 36 in the middle. Your goal in this version of the game is to get as many of those independents over to your NATO sides as possible. You can zoom in and out on the map by just rolling your mouse, so it's pretty convenient and simple. There is also a map on the lower right where you can click around to go to different parts of the world. The other features with this is it will show you resources. So resources are important. You need to build up certain resources to meet your needs, and also so you can export. Trade is a big part of this game. So the different resources that are in this game is agriculture, which is obviously farming. There is fresh water. There is timber, so forests. Petroleum, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's oil, and coal, metal ore, and uranium, which the different resources are needed for different products. Your industries can make different products. There's consumer goods, industrial goods, and military goods. Consumer goods are obviously for your people. Industrial goods are needed for different manufacturing processes and building other industrial plants. And military goods are needed for military units. In addition to that, some military units may require specific resources. So when you build nuclear weapons, you have to have uranium. If you don't have it locally, you're going to have to import it. And that can get expensive. There's also electrical power, which is going to show you where you can build dams to provide renewable electricity through hydroelectric power, and then population centers where you have a majority of your population. There's some other commands on here, like seeing how well in supply certain parts of your country are. The darker the red on the resources, by the way, I didn't touch on this, the darker the red, the more of a resource is there. You can build a mine. You can build multiple mines in a single hex. So if you zoom in here, I could build numerous mines here because it's a very strong resource stream for this particular resource. It will actually stop you when you are no longer able to build anymore there, when there aren't enough resources locally. Supply, I was looking at that for the overlay. That's important for all units, including production. You want to have units in very good supply, or it will take much longer and be much less efficient. for developing, new factories or fighting, combat. Loyalty obviously shows the likelihood of a rebellion. Garrisons will show you how well garrisoned, or show you the locations of garrisons for your military. High ground is important when you're considering a war. This game does become a little bit more tactical or strategic level for combat when combat does occur, so high ground is important. Close combat, so this will show you like where the cities and towns are that are going to limit visibility and affect, cause a close combat type situation, so like an urban environment. Defensive terrain is, well, pretty self-explanatory. The cities, you'll notice, are always very red, so they're very easy to defend. Water locations will show you where the rivers are, even though they're already on the map. It'll make it more explicit. And you can turn the hexes on or off, so you can make the hexes very explicit where they are on the map, because it is a hex map, or you can turn them off. Those are the basic map controls. Over here on the left for your country, it'll give you a brief overview of your country here, approval ratings, government type, allies, enemies, things like that. There's the finance section, which will show you your trade balance, your treasury, income and expenses tabs here. You've also got the ability to choose a cabinet minister. They can manage your economy if you so let them. You can also set certain restrictions on them, so if they're issuing bonds, that means you're taking out debt to finance your government. If you're running a negative, negative budget, then obviously that will be something that would be beneficial for you to be able to keep operating. They can also manage taxes and social spending on various social issues. There's the resource tab, which goes over production and consumption of various resources that I already mentioned. It does give you a little bit of a heads up, so if you're very strong in one resource, it may give you a little exclamation point saying you have an opportunity to try and export. Also lists the military, industrial, and consumer goods that I mentioned. Allows you to manage exports here too. There's some other tools on here that allow you to manage all of that, as well as a cabinet minister again. There's also a research section on here where you can research different weapons. This part I was probably the most impressed about this game, is how research is handled, because not only do you research general technologies like jet turbines for helicopters, nuclear missiles rather than just nuclear bombs, but you also research individual combat units. Infantry, recon, tanks, artillery, any type of unit. And as you research more things, more units will open up to you. So that's the thing that I found really interesting. One of the nice things if you do play Sandbox or the campaign as a non-superpower nation is there are going to be some units in here which are classified as world units. So certain units have an origin within your country. So for example, the RGM-6 Regulus submarine-launched cruise missile is a nuclear weapon. Its origins are from the United States. So only the United States can build this weapon unless they sell the license to another country. But the NLCM nuclear-launched cruise missile 1 Geyser, which is a different design, will be of similar technology level. It's basically, to me, it looks like the same type of thing. All the numbers are almost identical, if not completely identical. Yeah, they look like they are, is a worldwide weapon. So any country with enough technology, developing nuclear weapons and certain missile technologies could build this weapon. So that way if you're playing as a country that maybe didn't historically develop nuclear weapons, you're not restricted from developing them yourself if you develop the technologies. Doesn't mean that every single unit has a equivalent weapon to a historical one, but it does at least give you more options as far as developing weapons. And I think the research aspect of this game is probably the most impressive, immersive, and enjoyable parts of this game. Then there's a fabrication section where it'll list all the different types of weapons. You can click between land units, Air Force, Navy, or missiles, so this would be like nuclear weapons, and manage production there. It gives you a certain number of slots based on how many factories you have, and you also have the option of setting something to continuous building, which means that if you set it to build one, when that one finishes, it'll keep building another one and another one and another one until you tell it to stop. You can also manually queue things up, so you could say build 40 missiles and it'll build, in this case there's 2 production slots, so it'll build 2 at a time until those 40 are done. There's a reserves tab which will list all your units which you're not currently paying upkeep, or at least you're paying a reduced amount. They're in reserve, so they're not active. You can't use them right this minute, but you could activate them later, so you have basically standby units. I liked how reserve units were grouped into different types of units, so fighter interceptors, tactical bombers, strategic bombers. What I don't like is how they do the deployed units. So when you go to the deployment tab, which is this one right here, it will show you all the units that are deployed. You don't have, if you look at here on reserve, you can search between types of units. Here you only have the ability to filter between air, ground, or naval units. It doesn't give you the option to filter infantry versus tanks and armor. I don't know why they did that. I find that incredibly annoying. And that's probably the biggest complaint I have about this, well, second biggest complaint I have about this game. Gives you the option to command its orders, have global rules of engagements for all your forces. Here's where it gives you the defense conditions and the impact. You know, you have a 5% efficiency bonus. It affects the budget here. Build speed bonus is if you become more, you know, if things become more tense. You can also give units permission to use their own discretion in using nuclear weapons, or if you want to let them, you know, if you want to restrict that ability. You can change the initiative levels here, and also have a cabinet minister for your military. As far as that's concerned, that's the basic controls. One other thing to touch on here in this game is there's different tabs on the side that'll give you updates. So there's a catch-all, which is just kind of any random event or notification will pop up here. There's the United Nations, which will give you different notifications. So you'll see there's basically we're providing aid to a bunch of countries right now as part of the Marshall Plan, as well as giving military aid to fighting communism in the Mediterranean. So the Cold War is really already at you know, going. And then, you know, it gives you any updates and gives you the option to support or condemn different actions. That's the United Nations. There is also a economy tab, which will show you can, with different countries, you can initiate diplomacy. So let's go across the ocean. Let's go to England here. If you right-click on a country, it'll give you a bunch of options. Whether you want to, you know, in your country you can build things. Battle zone control, so if you want to give, you know, local military orders, you can do it there, or whether you just give theater orders, so you can do tactical or strategic level. You can do espionage to try and steal different technologies and things like that, and have missions like that. That costs money. Actions against, it will basically give you the option to control your actions in one location that are against that country. And you can do diplomacy. Diplomacy involves anything from signing treaties to, it'll list all your treaties with them, to selling, you know, giving money. I could give England $600 million if I felt like it, and they would definitely accept it. Or we could do trade, where maybe I would want technologies, designs for certain weapons, or actual military units themselves. If you don't have espionage, you don't know what units they necessarily have, so it's not going to tell me all the units that they have here, but I could sell them units. So, you know, I could sell them the AD-3 Sky Raider with this money and then submit it to them. But that's basically how diplomacy is managed. Diplomacy in this game is done well, I think. I like how the diplomacy is handled. I like how trade is handled. You can set up reoccurring treaties, so every so often you'll send a certain resource and they'll send you cash, or you can have it do a one-time lump sum. Any research notifications will pop up under the research tabs. Defense notifications will pop up here, including things from your advisors. So, you know, here my advisor's telling me that we have 25 unused production slots for the Army units, and we recommend increasing our build orders to take advantage of this additional capacity. You can, you know, basically stall them, agree or disagree, and you can also have, like I said, your ministers manage production, or if you prefer to manage production, you can do it. It'll give you updates on espionage as well as global treaties. One thing to keep in mind if you are a fan of the era is the Chinese Civil War ends a little bit early in this, in 1949. There was still fighting in 1950 where China took over the island of Han from the Republic of Taiwan forces, and a couple of smaller islands off the coast here. By 49 they were at least in full retreat and falling back to Taiwan, but they weren't really solidified in Taiwan only. I mean, they had a few other islands. So that is something that the game does change a little bit, probably because they don't want to throw you into a full-blown war right off the bat, which makes sense. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much a brief overview or a brief review of all the different features. The one thing I didn't like, at least from the Russian standpoint, is the economy is incredibly difficult to manage, in my opinion. There really is no tutorial to kind of teach you what to do. You're kind of left tinkering, and for fans of the series, that's fine because they're already familiar with the mechanisms. But I don't like, I mean, the U.S. starts in great shape. That's fine. That's historical. But as playing as Russia, I've noticed that you pretty much have a deficit that you start with. That could be anywhere from $20 to $60 million a day that you're spending in the red. And Russia obviously had issues with financial. They should not be even close to being on par with the United States in terms of income. But one thing I found really annoying is the fact that it's not that Russia is less well off. It's that they start so poorly off that you're ending up taking massive loans every single day. You have to take $100 million every other day, basically, just to stay afloat in debt. And while Russia went into debt a lot during the Cold War, $100 million a day, I mean, or $100 million every other day, that basically comes out to almost, $400 million a week, which is billions and billions and billions of dollars per year, which today is pretty standard. But during the Cold War, I mean, $1 billion, that's what the Manhattan Project cost. That was, I mean, $1 billion is a lot more then than it is now. The currencies have doubled. So that things are almost tripled since the start of the Cold War. So it just seemed a little bit excessive for the debt to start with the Soviet Union. I know they've got a ton of resources and you can really turn them into a superpower, but it just seemed like it just wasn't. It wasn't. Maybe it is. I mean, maybe I don't know enough about this to know that they were that bad off to begin with, but the country survived for 50 years beyond this point. Well, sorry, 40 years beyond this point of when the game starts. And given the way the game handles the economy, if you don't do anything, you're not going to last 40 years with that kind of debt. At least I can't see it. It'll be interesting to see what happens in my AAR, or After Action Report, which, for those of you who aren't familiar, an After Action Report is kind of strategy gamer slang for a Let's Play. But like I said, I'm going to be trying to do it in a little bit more of a stylized way. I'm not going to just be doing a Let's Play. It's going to be a little bit more creative than that. So that's something that's coming probably in a couple of weeks, maybe even a month or two. It's going to be something I'm going to try and put a lot of work into. But anyway, that's going to conclude this review. My biggest complaints about the game is the way it kind of handles the economy and makes it incredibly difficult to manage. There should be at least some tutorials in here, and I really didn't see any. To try and give you a heads up on what to do to at least break even. I'm not asking for it to be easy, but I think it would at least be fair to allow you to kind of understand what you need to do, rather than just have you basically try and fail. I didn't mention you can control speeds up here too, and you can pause the game and things like that. But yeah, I mean, that's my biggest complaint. I also don't like the way that the deployed units are handled. Those should be organized better. It makes it incredibly difficult when you've got hundreds of different units and there's no way to break them into columns of what type of units they are. In addition to that, other than those two things, those are really my only big complaints. I really, really enjoy this game so far. Yeah. If you like this, please like, subscribe, and leave your comments in the comment thread. If there's anything you'd like to see with this game or anything you'd like to see with any future games, let me know, and have a great day.